So let's talk about some in-game strength for the various bloated disciples of Nurgle with a tier list of Death Guard units from their new Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Death Guard. And in this video I thought we'd do a tier list of power levels of units in the new Codex, talking about which ones are looking stronger or weaker right now and why. This video I've aimed to sort Death Guard units into 5 rough tiers for how I'd rate their current strength initially in the Codex. As normal for unit tier list on the channel, I thought we'd talk through the weakest ones first, moving forward to the ones I'd rank strongest. The units now all have their official points costs. They've come out on the Warhammer 40K app, and broadly speaking it's looking like Death Guard are looking rather strong, though currently they've yet to be tested in tournaments. It does mean that this one's a little bit of an early take, after people have had chance to get to grips with their new detachments in a big way. It might be that certain things emerge as absolute meta picks that seem to be in every list, and maybe crowd out some other similar options. So take this as a bit of an initial take, as opposed to necessarily being completely gospel for top tier competitive things going forward. Unit tier lists in 40k always tend to be at least fairly arbitrary as well. I'm sure some things could be ranked a bit higher or lower depending on army context and unit preference. Some people just getting better value out of certain units compared with others depending on how they like to play the game, or some things being a really good fit for a role in an army that you need covering. The biggest warping factor in 10th edition tends to be detachments as well. They're pretty massive for 40k armies, as some of them just really favour certain subsets of units and help them massively at the expense of others. And for this one I'm mainly going to focus on core datasheet strength and how the unit might perform irrespective of detachment, though I will mention a few detachment things to units that are particularly relevant for them as we go along. If you're looking to pick up any 40k miniatures to add to your expanding Plague Legions, the video sponsor and Loaded Dice Games might be able to help with that. They have 15% off in the USA and I'll mention them a bit more later. There's also the channel's other affiliate discount retailers linked in the video description, usually between 10 and 20% off depending on where they are around the world, and any purchases through those help to support the channel. Let's jump into it though, and in tier 5, it feels like there isn't really much contest for the weakest datasheet for the Death Guard, which is the Miasmic Malignifier. 105 points for the Lumpy Nurgle Fortification, 12 wounds at toughness 10, a small close-range infantry killing attack with its noxious stink, and denies deep strike out to 12 inches, perhaps as its primary purpose. I guess it means that if you want to just lock down a section of your deployment zone, you could just park this in a corner. Probably too much effort for the opponent to usually want to bother to destroy, given that it doesn't really do anything, and guarantees that the opponent can't deep strike within range, whether it's regular deep strike or 6-inch deep strike. I think for 105 points there's all sorts of units that you could do that better with though. You could get some Plague Marines or Poxwalkers to spread out and cover at least a similar sort of area, and also be able to do objectives and things. I feel like the 12-inch deep strike denial is useful enough to have, but just not really when it's the only thing that a big fortification that just doesn't really do anything else can do. It lost the ability to infiltrate and the -1 to hit debuff nearby it in the Codex as well, and as a fortification, as ever, it seems to be left by the wayside power-wise. Next up, for the units that are ranked in tier 4, we've got some datasheets I'd consider kind of overshadowed. The Hellbrutes did get a points cut down to 115 points, and that gives you 8 wounds at toughness 9 with a 2+ save, 1 heavy weapon and some fairly punchy melee as it goes for its points cost, and its special rule is a +1 to wound against afflicted units, replacing the handing out contagions at range which went to the Plague Marines. It's got massive competition from the unique Death Guard Demon engines, plus just the rest of the armour as well, and its slow 7-inch move doesn't help it with actually getting that melee profile into the fight without getting a lot of damage or shot down or charged first. After the points cut it had, I'd say it's not unusable, but just feels like the unique Death Guard Demon engines kind of have this guy beat at the moment. For 50 points we have the Plague Surgeon. His main thing is to revive a slain Plague Marine each command phase. There is an enhancement to revive D3 of them in one detachment, which makes him a fair bit more useful. Then for the squad he has his own defensive profile, chips in with a bunch of Bale Sword attacks with strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, and lethal hits on a 5+ or better. And again I feel like the Death Guard Codex didn't really fix the main issue with him. He sort of depends on his Plague Marine units taking some damage but not being wiped out, which very much isn't guaranteed to happen in the high damage world of 40k. And even if he does get to activate his ability once, he's still only really just about justified his points cost in the first place, as opposed to adding further standout value that a whole bunch of the other characters can add. Between melee and revivals, I think there's nothing really too wrong with taking him. It's just more that he limps into just about being worth it as a slightly unnecessary choice for Plague Marines, when there's so many other characters that add far more. Otherwise, for Plague Marine support characters, we've got the Icon Bearer. He gives you +1 OC and a once per game cancel Battle Shock nearby. The extra OC would mean that the Death Guard units don't have to fear failing Battle Shock quite so much, and they could still have their stratagems active if he cancels the Battle Shock for them in the next turn. It just seems a whole load to ask for 45 points though. He doesn't even chip in any good damage just with that Plague Bolter. It's kind of solving a problem that Plague Marines don't really have too much in the first place. They already have alright OC as battle line troops, so there's a pretty reasonable chance that the extra OC that they have have might not make any difference at all in any one game. Again, like with the Plague Surgeon, I'd argue that all the other characters add more. Finally, for 195 points, we've got the Winged Demon Prince. He's 10 wounds at toughness 11 with a 2+ save and a 12-inch move, so fairly sturdy, but you do pay a very big points cost for him. In melee, he's 7 attacks at strength 8, damage 3 and lethal hits, and between those two could be interesting enough for certain enhancements that could go a long way to making him either more dangerous or tougher. I'd argue that his special rules just aren't really all that great though. He does Battle Shock on charges, which always tends to be a niche one with the way they work at the moment, and forces Desperate Escape Test nearby, which is something but also doesn't tend to be super impactful. The opponent always having the choice of the better option between just leaving their squads in combat and counter-charging, or falling back and ultimately losing around a third of their unit, which in a depleted squad you might not care about all that much. Overall just feels like he adds far less than the on-foot Demon Prince, and his stats just aren't so great for the points cost. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Loaded Dice Games, a US-based gaming store north of Los Angeles. They've been open since 2023 and have a pretty huge inventory of Warhammer 40k products being sold at 15% off Games Workshop's prices, always aiming to get an extensive amount of new pre-orders, and in particular seem to specialise in paint and hobby supplies, with a pretty huge range on offer there. Here's their website, which I'll leave links in the video description. It gives 15% off Games Workshop prices. In general, it seems easy to navigate and search. And if there's anything that shows up that happens not to be in stock, you can order things in. Take a look at Death Guard related things. They still seem to have the Codex and Combat Patrol available to pre-order right now. For their physical store, as mentioned, it's located north of Los Angeles. You can find the address here, and they have monthly RTTs for 40k and Age of Sigmar. Might be of interest if you're in the local area. But in any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. You can find them links down in the video description alongside their social medias if you'd like to check them out. Moving on to tier 3, and we're starting off with maybe a slightly strong one in the Lord of Poxes. I was kind of debating between putting him either in tier 2 or tier 3, as he is vying for competition against a whole bunch of some seriously other good support characters, and does bring some interesting stuff, but perhaps his good buffs don't necessarily help out Plague Marines as much as you might like. You can't shoot his unit from greater than 18 inches away, which really is a helpful boost, though it does mean that if you wanted him as a backfield camping unit with that ability, you're paying a massive price tag for it for 170 points, and then you're not making good use of his contagion range or his melee abilities. And if advancing into the midboard, it might annoy enemy shooting, but then they might just be able to get in range. The plus 3-inch contagion ability is also really handy as well. The more afflicted units the better, particularly against enemy shooting. In general, he'll be with Plague Marines though, and they can hand out some affliction at range with their bolt guns anyway as well, so might be a tiny bit of overlap there too. Both of those are genuinely good abilities though, and he does have a fairly punchy melee profile, with lots of attacks with both lethal hits and devastating wounds. My guess is that he'll probably be a slightly more niche leader for Plague Marines out there, though I might be wrong, and as mentioned I could have happily ranked him in tier 2. Next up we have the Predator tanks for the Death Guard, 135 points for the Annihilator and 145 for the Destructor. Their toughness 10-11 wound gun tanks, and might often be taking aim at slightly softer targets than other armies might have them shoot at if you can get that afflicted unit range out. So they're shooting at things with -1 toughness and potentially with worse saves by 1 as well. The Destructor for 145 points has its rapid fire autocannon, which now has lethal hits, and its special rule is now to debuff 1 non-monster and vehicle unit for -1 AP for other Death Guard shooting. That is a nice buff, but being limited to not affect monsters and vehicles does mean that there's a big chunk of units out there that you'd really like that effect but doesn't. It is pricier than most Predator tanks for other factions too. And then the Annihilator is 135 points with las cannons, a chance for some mortal wounds after shooting. They might enjoy Mortarian's Hammer for some long-range contagions to hit their targets with before they start firing. Both of them seem just kind of alright as gun turrets, the Annihilator just for some focused anti-tank, the Destructor between its damage output and special rule. To me though, they kind of feel overshadowed by the Bloat Drones and the Blight Haulers for their fire support profile. They just feel a bit more efficient for their points cost overall to me. Here we have the Land Raider as well for 240 points, with its assault ramp to deliver Plague Marines or Terminators into melee at long range, move 10 inches, drop out 3 and then make a charge. And then also it's a big sturdy unit with some anti-tank fire that will still be a pain to deal with and can chip into some genuine damage dealing. Between its stats and utility like other Land Raiders, it's solid enough, definitely usable. Though as with Land Raiders from other factions though, I think its main weakness is the units that it wants to transport and how they might like to get there otherwise. Death Shroud Terminators do feel like an obvious fit for it, and it even had the transport capacity expanded so it can take 7 models, so you can have 6 Death Shroud and a leader for them, all charging out of its armoured hold. But they've got a pretty awesome deep strike delivery rule with that 6-inch deep strike that they can do, so sort of don't really need to pay the massive cost of a Land Raider. And Plague Marines who might really like to get to melee have the Rhino. In general, that was the way that they tended to get fielded prior to the Death Guard Codex, and I can't really see it changing too much now, particularly given the Rhino got a pretty awesome shooting buffing rule thrown in. It still feels like an adequate usable choice for both of those units to me though. Next up, we've got the Noxious Blightbringer, which I'll probably put towards the lower end of this tier, maybe borderline tier 4. He adds a little bit of movement to Death Guard units, a +1 to move and reroll advance and charge rolls, could help Plague Marines get into melee out of a transport perhaps, or could allow Poxwalkers and their detachments to get where they need to be just that bit faster and help body block the objectives. He also has the side benefit of enemies having to test a bit more leadership in the mid-board if he is nearby, which with the Death Guard sort of signature grinding playstyle could genuinely be quite important for stopping the enemy scoring primaries. And he does chip in with a little bit of personal threat with that Plague Bell as well, 5 attacks at AP 0, damage 2 in melee. I feel like what he has is useful, but just not really all that much to write home about for 50 points. The movement is handy and occasionally could matter really big if it makes the difference between a charge being successful or not, but again maybe doesn't really feel like it's going to be reliably helpful every single game. Plenty of games they'll just make their charge anyway, and you might as well just have had more fun buffing damage dealer characters, but overall rates him somewhere between borderline tier 3 versus tier 4. Moving onwards and upwards to tier 2, here are the units I'd rate as stronger Death Guard units, and first up I've chosen to put the Blightlord Terminators here. Quite nice to see them with a lot more useful damage output. 115 points for 3, 185 for 5, or 370 for 10 of them, and the Codex gave these sturdy Terminators some improvements. 3 heavy weapons per 5 now rather than 2, a nice +1 strength and +1 AP when they're shooting afflicted units, which particularly with the save debuff that you can get on that from the custom plagues, means their ranged weapons could be bypassing armor saves really quite a lot of the time, and they also have damage 2 melee at base now, meaning they're far less of an incidental threat there, particularly with a whole bunch of lethal hits on the go. They feel like they're extra nasty with the Lord of Virulence as well, who can give them reroll wound rolls with their shooting weapons, and potentially could be a good bodyguard for him while he's commanding some blast firepower from a bunch of bloat drones. They're also looking really quite solid in Flyblown Host, with a few buffs that can really impact them maybe more than virtually any other Death Guard unit. It feels like it could be a strong detachment on paper now it gets the custom plagues as well. They also have some nice synergies from the Terminator detachment and others too. I still maybe say that they feel like a little bit less obvious and easy to use versus the Death Shroud Terminators with their big hitting damage and close deep strike, but definitely a unit with a whole bunch of interest now, both with genuinely scary range and melee threat when they have their buffs going. Next up, we've got Death Guard Spawn for 80 points. They can scout 6-inch forwards and move 8, so are a little bit faster and could be useful for an expendable units to push out afflictions against the enemy. The Death Guard version are also not too trivial to take down as well, as they get toughness 7 with a 4+ save and a 5+ feel no pain. Their special rules might also inflict a few mortal wounds on enemies as they die as well, potentially getting some damage on them in close combat, and also having a deadly demise rule which occasionally might do something. They don't really feel like a unit that you want to go too heavy on, but for some cheap skirmishing outriders that can still mess up a squad of Space Marines, they feel like they've got a solid role. Next up, we've got the Plague Burst Crawler for 195 points. This one's the Death Guard artillery piece, D6 plus 3 shots at strength 8, AP 1 and damage 2, plus some entropy cannons that now have some longer range, or plague spitters. Indirect fire weapons almost always feel at least fairly interesting, given that a lot of 40k armies just aren't really expecting indirect fire in a large amount at the moment, and it could really be bad news for certain armies like say Eldari with fragile aspect warriors, and perhaps particularly more so in things like Mortarian's Hammer, where you could mark units that are out of line of sight to be afflicted, and then reduce their toughness and make their saves worse. They could also work really quite well with a Lord of Virulence if you have one of those teleporting in. He could mark a target and give them 4 rerolls to hit, which means the mortars could be really quite accurate and helps get around the 4+ to hit limitation for artillery firing indirect. And in the Codex they also gain some scattered mortal wound fire effect. Units nearby their primary target with a small chance to take D3 mortal wounds, more so if afflicted, and that feels like the sort of rule that could occasionally matter quite big if you roll high and get those mortal wounds against the exact targets that don't want it, but a lot of the time won't really be all that standout. Overall I guess that the majority of armies won't be spamming these things, but perhaps you might get some oddball armor lists that run free with a Lord of Virulence, and that does seem at least fairly scary on paper. They certainly pay a big premium for their damage firing indirect though. Next up, and maybe a slightly surprising winner of the update, was the Death Guard Defiler. These things were pretty costly before, all the way up at I think 195 points or so. They dropped all the way down to 165. I feel like for their general purpose offering that has them looking way better. You get 14 wounds on them at toughness 11 with a 5+ invulnerable save, which I think is fairly solid stats for that points cost. Some fairly general purpose firepower that can strip cover from a unit, so help it out against further Death Guard fire. And then some really quite big hitting melee if they can close the gaps with some enemy heavies. 5 attacks at strength 16 and damage D6 +1 is really bad news for tanks or knights. threats. The really big profile doesn't help them so much, but they can scuttle over terrain, which could occasionally get them where they need to be. Perhaps the main thing that surprised me a little bit for these guys was the points cost. They're just looking so much more tempting when they're only, say, 20 to 30 points more than a Predator tank. Next up, I've chosen to rank the Tallyman here, given that he's only 40 points and comes with command point generation. Ideally, he wants to be on the table, not in a transport, so he can try and have a go at farming his command point each turn. Rolling 2 dice, and on a 7+ he gets 1. You could put him in a Plague Marine unit to babysit the home field if desired, and if so, he could give them ignores modifiers. Though given that you can farm his command point thing even if he's not in a unit, it feels like he could be just a handy enough area denial nuisance unit. Maybe hiding out of line of sight in the home field behind a ruin base, screening out some deep strike, and maybe being in a position to do certain actions if needed, likely generating around about 3 command points over the course of a game. And if an enemy unit has to waste a turn killing him, then all well and good. It's not exactly that tough, but at 4 wounds at toughness 6, there's at least a good chance he could survive a round or so of small arms. Overall, at 40 points, seems like a pretty easy include to have a little accountant of plagues sat in the backfield counting the tallies and giving you some more command points for stratagems. Finally, for this tier, I've chosen to rank the Death Guard Demon Prince, this one being the one on foot. I would say maybe a little bit borderline at initial impressions, tier 2 versus tier 3. He does have some chunky stat lines and some good special rules though. He gets a big toughness 12 at 10 wounds, so it's pretty chunky and hard to take down unless you've got dedicated anti-heavy tank profiles. He gets lone operative near infantry, so in general you wouldn't be able to target him quite so easily versus the winged one as moving up the board. And he also could bring some extra command points to the table. Discounted stratagems to units within 12 inches, 1 per battle round. Finally, he also gives an aura of 6 inches worth of cover, not necessarily the hardest thing to come by in 40k 10th edition, but that could be handy enough for Plague Marines or Blight Lord Terminators or things advancing towards the mid-board, allowing them to advance exactly where they need to and not having to worry too much about towing in terrain or anything like that if they want to have maximum durability. Overall, between the lone operative, 3 stratagems, cover, and a fairly beefy stat line, it feels like he's fairly justifiable to me. I think he would need to be paired with the right units though. Maybe Blight Lord Terminators or Plague Marines on foot in Flyblown Host or something could be alright. Will be interesting to see if he makes the cut versus other big damage dealers. Let's get into some seriously strong looking paragons of the Plague Legions though. And here are a whole bunch of Death Guard units I'd rate as pretty top tier right now. There may be within this a little bit of variation between some things seeming more standout and some things a little bit less so. I have just saved a couple more units for a special mention that just seem like they're going to be standout strong versus the rest. First up, and certainly one of the very strongest here, potentially in the borderline sort of special mention tier, are the Plague Marines and all the support that they can get. It feels like they're going to be the virulent heart of a whole bunch of armies, just being all very efficient between their durability and damage rules, but particularly so when supported by both the Chaos Rhino and their good buffing characters. I feel like maybe no one element of their big overall combo is crazy standout on its own, but when all taken together, they do look absolutely terrifying. First up, we've got the Plague Marines themselves, 95 points for 5 or 190 for 10. Not really all that much of an increase when they've gained toughness 6, which makes them a fair bit more durable. They still have their vast array of different melee profiles, a bunch of heavy plague weapons and close range special weapon fire support. The Blight Launcher gaining blast as well didn't hurt, but they also gained a very nice debuffing rule, being able to hand out contagions of Nurgle at range, which means they can also be a pretty excellent unit for marking one enemy unit to light up with a whole bunch of guns later in the turn. Feels like still the most obvious thing to do with them would be to put a unit of 10 of them, support them with characters and put them in a Rhino. I definitely feel like there's other ways that you could use them though, maybe multiple small squads to hand out more contagions, and slightly different builds with certain characters or certain detachments, maybe having a bit more draw to on foot ones and Flyblown Host perhaps. Rhinos do seem like the obvious way to go for most of them though. 85 points for the normal fast and sturdy transport tank, definitely having good synergy with the Plague Marines given that they're pretty valuable, and still even with toughness 6 there's plenty of things that'll kill them fairly fast. Anything mass damage 2 or 3 is likely to have a good time against them, and only moving 5 inches on the board they are rather slow and definitely need some help getting where they need to be. Even if just jumping straight out of a Rhino, that already adds 3 inch to their threat range, and if they don't happen to have anything that they can get into that turn, the Rhino itself can move up, potentially going 12 inches plus an advanced roll if they want to stay embarked. In the Codex though, they got a rather awesome buffing rule. A disembarking unit can get reroll wound rolls if they shoot at the same target as the Rhino, and that's pretty helpful for the Plague Marines weapons already, with some Blight Launchers or maybe other special weapons on the go. But seems to be kind of next level for the 3 buffing characters I've also chosen to mention in this tier. Blight Spawns, Plague Casters and Biologist Putrefiers, all of which have some pretty helpful close range shooting in their own way. I'd say maybe the Malignant Plague Caster out of the 3 of them it really benefits to a complete next level kind of way. Between that and the debuffs from Contagions, Plague Marine shooting could be a big threat to all sorts of things, never mind any follow-up melee. After their squad has disembarked, you could even use the Rhino to either stage more Death Guard, having some jump in when the others jump out, or could just be a cheap expendable unit to roll around the board, throwing out some more contagions as an expendable tough thing, or doing nuisance charges to hold the enemy up. Overall loads of value, they still seem like they're going to be the ride of choice for the very scary Plague Marines. Next up, we've got the Poxwalkers, and 60 points for an infiltrate unit of almost any sort is often a good thing. The Death Guard zombies, starting in the mid-board, can just put 10 OC down on a mid-board objective, and they're a little bit harder to kill than most chaff out there with toughness 4 and a 5+ feel no pain. Against the right army, they could even threaten to do big move block things, even just stretching out a unit in front of a bunch of enemy squads and moving them forward to pin everyone back for a turn. They might occasionally do a little bit of damage with their lethal hits, though for the most part they don't really do too much. If they get into some light infantry, they might annoyingly regenerate a few zombies with their special rule. And for combos, they've got a few interesting things. You could make for a weirdly dangerous horde squad with Typhus in tow. There'd be an extra important unit for the flyblown host to allow infantry units to scout up the board and not be screened out by enemy infiltrators or scouts. And of course they have the great big scary 150 Poxwalker detachment, which for 780 points puts you 120 Poxwalkers on the board, and then 3 more squads of 10 arrive throughout the game at 2000 points, which means that you start out with a slightly oppressive feeling level of board control. You've still got 1200 points worth of regular Death Guard army to actually deal damage to the enemy as well on top of that, so it's not like you won't have any threats. I feel like some armies without adequate anti-infantry could potentially find that a real struggle, though with infiltrating big style stuff like that, the coin flip of who goes first matters in a huge way. Next up, we've got 2 of the light demon engines. The Mephitic Blight Horse might have got a small points increase in the Codex, but their utility for dealing with enemy tanks and monsters went way up. With a multi-melter and missiles, they already have fairly adequate firepower against enemy elites, but now with those same guns they get a +1 to hit and to wound monsters and vehicles, where previously it was only one of those 2 +1s and it was only against vehicles. And then on top of that, their multi-melter gain lethal hits as well, which is another big boost against taking down tough stuff. I feel like between that and being at least relatively fast for Death Guard, and still having kind of fine durability for their cost, I feel like they're overall really quite strong. Perhaps their biggest issue though maybe being competition versus the Blight Launcher Bloat Drone, which is very good as well. I'd probably put them a little bit tier 1 versus tier 2 on the borderline as opposed to right at the top like the Plague Marines, but with their big hitting anti-tank rules that they've gained, they still feel like a very efficient unit for their battlefield role. Otherwise, maybe in a similar sort of spot on the borderline versus tier 1 versus tier 2, we've got the Featured Bloat Drone, this one being the regular one, now with a choice of the Flesh Mower versus Plague Spitters. Again, like the Blight Haulers, maybe not feeling quite so standout versus the Heavy Blight Launcher version, so it feels like between these Mephitic Blight Haulers and those Bloat Drones, you could have a surprisingly scary spam of light demon engines for Death Guard. Lots of somewhat fast-moving holes zooming around the board, doing damage and dealing contagions out. The Bloat Drones still seem great as a sort of Outrider-style unit though, with good movement and the ability to fall back, shoot and charge, so that means that they can't get locked up by enemies and can go floating straight past them to hand out more contagions. If they get blown up, they have Deadly Demise D3 as well, which could be interesting enough for auto-triggering that in the Virulent Vectorium. In the right circumstances, one on its last legs could even charge something that's probably going to kill it and hand out D3 mortal wounds to 5 enemy units or so if you can put it in the right place. Both the Flesh Mower and the Plague Spitters seem interesting, maybe the Flesh Mower being a bit more general purpose, seeing as it isn't quite so locked to dealing with infantry only. Next up, we've got the Lord of Plagues himself in Mortarion. He's a much bulkier 380 points now, so it is going to be a bigger commitment in a list to include him. With his higher points cost came some hugely beefed up stats though. He's still dead tough with his 16 wounds, toughness 12, and his 5+ feel no pain. But his damage output with the Scythe got a brutal anti-elite profile, absolutely murdering standard sized Space Marines and significantly better against Terminator equivalents than he was. He gets that fun Aura of Death style rule, where he can hand out a massive amount of mortal wounds to any units he finishes a move next to, and then his 3 powerful buffing abilities are now reactive things in the enemy turn, and getting reactive moves, reactive shooting, or fights in death could all potentially be pretty massive deals in the right circumstances. I guess in particular the reactive move being just very reliable, particularly on such a big scary profile model as Mortarion himself is, or maybe some nearby Terminators or something. Overall seems like a very scary model that's going to be hard to ignore, but if you do deal with him, it's going to soak up a huge amount of firepower. And he's got some fun stratagem support in Virulent Vectorium as well, maybe in particular the one where he can drain the life out of nearby enemies that might have stayed charged and not quite killed him. Next up, we've got the 3 Terminator characters, all of which are looking rather great in their own way. Lord of Contagion is now the most expensive at 110 points, and he seems to be the one to go for to lead the Death Shroud Terminators. He's got a personal big hitting damage 3 profile with that Man Reaper, but just gives some absolutely brutal melee buffs to Death Shroud, Sustained hits 1 is already quite nice for the entire unit, but also getting lance on those sort of mid-strength profiles really makes them so much better at destroying tough stuff, and feels like he could be a very solid choice to accompany say 3 Death Shroud Terminators jumping out of Deep Strike with their close charge rule. The sustained hits on his profile is also interesting as well. He'll certainly enjoy anything that can get criticals on a 5+. There's an enhancement to allow him personally to do that in the Virulent Vectorium, and a stratagem for the whole unit to do it in Champions of Contagion. That's to just make them next level dangerous to just about anything in 40k. His other special rule became a Revive on Death on a 2+, which is genuinely useful for a last push. He's got a profile in his own right that's adequately threatening to entire squads worth of enemies, so even if the opponent makes a big push and wipes out him and his Death Shroud bodyguard, he can just be standing up again to have another go. Next up, for 90 points, we've got the Lord of Virulence, who's a fair bit cheaper and still has some big stats. Plenty of damage 2 hits with his Plague Power Fist, some Plague Flamer style shooting, and if he leads a squad of Blight Lord Terminators, allows them to reroll wound rolls at range, which given that they get extra AP against their targets if they're afflicted, means they're going to be stacking a whole ton of wounds on just about any enemy target out there. And when he could have extra AP from their own special rule and extra AP from contagions, loads of hits and wounds are going to add up to a whole ton of failed saves. Otherwise though, he's got a really nice gunnery command buff. He can mark a unit for reroll 1s to hits for all Death Guard shooting in general, but if you fire blast weapons against the target, you get to reroll all hit rolls against that, and that's pretty massive for bloat drones with their heavy blight launchers, which are already a very efficient profile just by themselves, never mind if you get to reroll all hits, and also Plague Burst mortars as well, where you could potentially be having them hitting on force rerolling hits even for things that they can't see. There's a few detachment specific things for him as well, such as the Lone Operative enhancement for Mortarian's Hammer, where he could just be running along with a unit of bloat drones and happily marking targets for them. The Death Lord's Chosen also gives him an option to auto-infect objective markers, which could help out gunnery command against a whole bunch of units at once potentially. Overall he seems very efficient, and looks like him plus feet of bloat drones with heavy blight launchers could be a really easy include for some massive Nurgle firepower. Next up, I've also still chosen to put Typhus in this rank. I feel like he went from maybe being by far the standout choice to more on the same sort of level as the other two. He got 10 points more expensive, but still does all the things that basically made him kind of auto-include for pre-Codex Death Guard, and he hasn't really gone up all that many points, just maybe got a bit more competition from both the Lord of Contagion and Lord of Virulence getting better. For his stats, he still remains an extra fighty Lord of Contagion, with 6 attacks versus the regular one, though lacking the big melee buffs. Instead of that, he gets the -1 to hit in melee, which is still good for his lead unit, definitely makes them harder and more indomitable to take out in close combat, and then just for some incredibly reliable value, there's that Eater Plague, where he'll usually be throwing out d6 mortal wounds at an enemy each turn. It doesn't really take too many turns of that before he's made back his points value, at least in theory lands. Still feels like he's got good options, either joining Terminators or Poxwalkers, or even still potentially running solo as a deep striker with some weird threat and not being trivial to take down. Will be interesting to see if he still makes the cut-in lists, or whether or not the Lord of Contagion might pressure him out for Death Shroud Terminators. Then finally, for the units that I've ranked here, we've got 3 good support options for the Plague Marines. The Malignant Plaguecaster, I think, is pretty awesome damage value for the squad, particularly with the buffs that they can get. He can spit out d6 plus 3 torrent attacks with strength 6, AP 2 and damage d3, and with contagion buffs for extra AP and -1 toughness, it gets way better against a whole bunch of things that it might struggle against, and particularly so with the Rhino's Disembark rule, allowing it to even reroll wound rolls. Then on top of that, for the regular Plague Marines, he gives them sustained hits 1 against afflicted units. That'll be everything that they attack in melee, but hopefully should be able to hit some things at range as well, and it can combo really well with the Biologist Putrefier as well, as he gives you critical hits on a 5+, so that's sustained and lethal hits both going off for the unit at range and melee there. On top of that, he also has the side benefit of messing with infantry melee a little bit as well, and does chip in with a bit of genuine melee damage even on top of all that. Overall, that's just loads of value to add to the sheer damage a Plague Marine squad can do, made even better by the fact that he went 5 points down in the Codex. Next up, we've got the Foul Blightspawn for 60 points as well. He's maybe not quite so much a generalist, but still adds a similar fairly big torrent damage attack. I'd say for the most part his is weaker than the Plaguecaster's one, though it does have its advantages. It's strength 7 and flat damage 2, with anti-infantry 2+ and ignores cover. Again, it's all really like the bonuses from Afflicted and the Rhino buff as well. Otherwise, the other big thing that he adds is a once per game fights first, making Plague Marine units that he's joined into a real problem to deal with, and could get extra value out of heroic intervention as well. He maybe could be interesting to combo with a fighty character like the Lord of Poxus. Finally, he prevents advance rolls within 9 inches of him as a bonus. A lot of the time that might not matter too much, but with the amount of things that can advance and charge in Warhammer 40k, that could actually be surprisingly problematic for certain armies. Things like Space Marine Vanguard Task Force or Blood Angels with stratagems wouldn't enjoy that too much at all. Overall still seems good value for 60 points. Finally, the Biologist Putrefier might have lost his free grenades, though still has loads of value by the critical hits on a 5+ and making all weapons lethal hits. As mentioned, that combos really well with the Plague Caster, and he also chips in with his own range damage with Hyper Blight grenades, again which could use the damage buff of the Rhino when they jump out. He did go down 5 points as well, and at just 45 points he's really not that hard to include in a unit, and he also adds an extra bonus as well with the chance to gain some extra OC if his squads kill something in melee. And given that Plague Marine units can be pretty lethal with his buffs plus other ones thrown in, that seems like it could be a distinct possibility. I feel like his unit would often just want to be charging things on the mid-board objectives and doing some serious damage to them. Overall, loads of power and a very cheap add-on for a unit. Finally though, for the main tier list, before talking about a few demons, I wanted to mention 2 units that just seem extra standout for their datasheet strength alone, even if they're not necessarily all that far above the previous ones, particularly with the Plague Marine combos used in concert. Deathshroud Terminators though just look hellishly scary, 140 points for 3 tanky Terminators with 4 wounds, and really general purpose melee with mass strength 8, AP -2, damage 2, with weapon skill 2+ and lethal hits, plus having a sweep option. Their target's weakened by Contagions of Nurgle, and maybe having a Lord of Contagion thrown in for sustained hits 1, lance, and also his own damage 3 big hitting attacks. Basically they've got scary melee and are fairly tough, and the biggest thing about them is they can deep strike charge at 6 inches, provided the unit that they're deep striking next to is afflicted. It means that you might need some other units to help them get where they need to be, or maybe certain other detachment rules like the Mortarian's Hammer one, where you can mark some units to be afflicted at the start of the turn. But provided that you can make that happen, it means that you near guarantee them get into close combat. A 6-inch charge is usually an 83% chance of that going off, and if you have a command point reroll budgeted, which ideally you really should, then that basically goes up to be around about a 97% chance of them making a charge, which is just very, very scary with the sheer amount of damage they can do, and at least being a somewhat tough unit to take down in return. Maybe not standout so for their points cost, but I guess if you did go for 3 of them with a Lord of Contagion along for the ride, the Lord of Contagion at least himself will be near guaranteed to stand up and survive the turn and go on to deal some more damage. Overall, it seems like a massive problem to the enemy battle plans to have such a scary units being able to hit things before they've got any chance to try and deal with them, and are a good unit for all sorts of synergies and stratagem and detachment support, basically being one of the big scary damage and defense combos. Likely anything invested is likely to go a bit further here compared with elsewhere. Otherwise, maybe feeling like it deserves a special mention just for its sheer improvement is the Feated Bloat Drone with Heavy Blight Launcher. These just seem like a super easy include in Death Guard army list right now, with such a scary general purpose and easy to buff gun platform. Those Heavy Blight Launchers hit with D6+2 shots at strength 10, AP -2 and damage 3, so a pretty perfect Terminator killing profile just anyway. But there's a good chance their targets might be weakened by being afflicted, maybe handed out by some Plague Marines if you can't get something else too close to their targets, and they go kind of next level if you hand out 4 rerolls to hit with a Lord of Virulence. Overall, that just feels monstrously efficient general purpose firepower that can move fairly fast around the board and is acceptably durable. If they happen to kill anything, you also get the bonus of a splash of afflicted units to enemy things nearby, which occasionally might be helpful, though not always. Just feels like it could be hard to go wrong with a few of those acting as a fire support battery in the backfield with speed enough to push forward in the later game when it makes sense to get more fire lanes or put on more pressure. I guess in theory one of their bigger weaknesses could be being tagged in melee due to the blast keyword not being able to fire into that and not being able to fall back, shoot and charge like the regular bloat drones, so they might be a unit that takes a little bit more thought to use as opposed to being able to push forward without so many regrets like the other bloat drones or the blight haulers perhaps. I'm not sure if they necessarily deserve to be mentioned above the other top tier units, though I feel like their firepower on paper just solves a whole bunch of problems for the Death Guard. They've just got massively scarier than they were before with only a tiny points increase. That's it for the main tier list, though I'll just mention the Demons quickly. They certainly feel like they stand apart from the Death Guard given they're sort of allied demons for one specific detachment in those Taliban summoners. At first impressions at least, it feels like maybe 5 of them are interesting enough in their own way. I'd just say that the Plague Drones themselves still feel like a probably not at their points cost and the way that their damage output is. For the rest though, they all seem to have something pretty interesting to draw them to them. Nurglings can gum up the mid-board early on, and they have that good respawn stratagem, which makes them, I think, almost auto-include in that detachment. The Great Unclean One and Rottages both feel like units that are adequately threatening and durable, and make good use of some of the stratagems and enhancements from the detachments. Playbearers maybe feel like they're a bit more take or leave. Maybe one unit for their sticky objectives could be a good idea though. And Beasts of Nurgle can hand out the buffs nearby for nice and cheap, and just generally cheap annoying scouting units that can do the proximity to demons things nice and easily for Death Guard units, and could be hard to deal with their regeneration thing. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now though. Let me know your thoughts as to the Death Guard units down in the comments below. Which ones would you be rating on the tabletop as stronger or weaker right now, and what detachments are you going to be putting on the table? Let me know if you'd rate anything higher or lower. I'll certainly look forward to covering some competitive army lists once they start to hit tournaments. It'll be fun to see what emerges as victorious in practice. As mentioned earlier, a big thank you to Loaded Dice Games for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check out their web store, links down in the video description, if you'd like some Warhammer models at 15% off in the USA. And for folks around the world and other places, if you're looking to pick up any Warhammer models, anything bought through the channel affiliate discount retailers linked below helps to support Auspex Tactics, so a big thank you to anyone using those links when they pick things up. I'll leave this there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the channel, and as well as the discount links, there's also the Patreon page which you can support on. Channel patrons do get a few advantages: seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.